Okay, I'm going to get started. People can come on in as they do. My name is Deb Cohen, and I guess I was told that I should just do my cali roles because I have not learned the word no very well, so I've taken on too many roles in too many places. I'm the Associate Dean of Academic Affairs at Southern New England School of Law. For the last year and a half, I've also been overseeing academic support because our director left, and I insisted on an interim title, though it doesn't seem to have done anything for me. I also have been running orientation at the law school for the last 4 years. What I'm going to talk to you today about is law students, and it probably should have been learning preferences, not learning styles. But I'm going to start by just telling you a little bit about me so that you understand, and asking a little bit about you. I'm a law professor. I have just finished, I'm scared to say, my 15th year of teaching. I came to law teaching like many people. How many professors in the room? Okay, now of you all, does anyone have training in teaching or education? Couple, not a lot. Okay, I come from a family of half lawyers, half teachers. Okay, so my father and my older sister are a lawyer, and my mother and my other sister are a teacher. So I had to split the baby because you didn't want to unbalance the odds. So I am both a lawyer and a teacher. Except I realized I have a great deal of training in law and almost no training in teaching. And when I went into teaching, they basically said, well, just do what your favorite law professors did and that'll be good. They told me I should model on my favorite female law professors, only I didn't have any female law professors, so it was a little tough. But okay. And in my first few years of teaching, that's what I did, and that was great because I was still so busy learning how to organize and understand the depth of the material that was probably all I could do. But as I went on, I started realizing that I was an atypical law student, and that the traditional method wasn't necessarily what I thought was best. So over time, I tried to incorporate different things in the classroom. In fact, that's how I got involved in cali in, 1995 or 96. And I was very excited to see, if you look at the cali page, my first lesson, must, may, shall, is number 2 on the first year list. I'm a top 10. Anyway, so I started by doing websites and cali lessons in the 90s, and rapidly sort of grew out of that. And moved on in the last 3 or 4 years to podcasting. I started podcasting, but I realized, particularly as I took over orientation, that I had no framework within which to know, was I doing the right thing? Did I have any guidance or guidelines or basis for thinking that what I might be doing might be right, geared correctly, or anything else? So I've started looking into something about legal theories of psychological theories of education and teaching, and I've been having a great deal of fun with that, and I'm getting more and more into it, and I'm not alone. There are a whole cadre of law professors that have started doing this. So, while this became really big in secondary and primary and upper level education in the 80s, right now, 20 to 25 years later, it's catching on in law school. So that does say, isn't that what they say about the law? It's 15 to 20 years behind the times, and I guess we're not so different. Anyway, so that's a little bit about me. And what I came up with, and what I'm going to actually hand out to all of you to start with, is this questionnaire in which you can all, I'd like you all to take the questionnaire. It's not a test, it's a questionnaire. There are no right answers, there are only preferences, okay? Now the neat thing about it is that if you read the instructions, it tells you at the very beginning that you may skip a question if it doesn't apply to you, and you may choose more than one answer if that is necessary. I've got some more. Thank you. And so, if we all just take a few minutes and start by doing the questionnaire, we'll then score ourselves in the scoring. Let me tell you right now, the scoring is the hardest part. So if anyone's having difficulty scoring after they answer it, do so. What you very simply do is, as I said, you may skip if you don't like, you may answer more than one. There are 16 questions. When you are done with them, you then transpose your answers. For example, if on number 1 you chose A and B, you would circle the letters in A and B, and we'll go from there after that. So I'll give you all a few minutes to do this. anyone has any questions on scoring it or figuring it out, just raise your hand. And the hardest part whenever I do this with my students is getting them to score it. It's truly, they do this exercise awful. Now, when you're done answering all the questions, you turn the page, and some of you are already there, but there is basically the questions down the margin, and if you circled A, you then go and circle the letter in that category. And when you're all done, you have to count up the number of V's you circle, the number of A's you circle, the number of R's, and the number of K's. And then you have to add all of those numbers together so you have a total number of answers that you had. And with that, we will be able to ascertain your learning preferences, at least at this particular moment in time. Do this directly on the computer and it scores it all for you. I will tell you why I actually go through the manual exercise as we go along. Okay, basically, after you have completed your grid and counted up the number of V's, A's, R's, and K's, what you need to do is total all your V's, A's, R's, and K's on the next page. And then what you do is you figure out if you had 10 to 16 total, that's the number of steps. So you choose your number of steps, and then what you do is in all of these, you put from highest to lowest what your V, A, R, and K are. So if you had the most A's, that goes first. And so you list them in declining order, and then you list the number of the difference between the two. So if you had 7 V's and 3 A's, it would be 4. Does that make sense? If you're having questions, just raise your hand. I'll come by, and I've become an expert at doing this. I'll give you all another couple of minutes, and then we'll start talking about it. finishing up as we go, but I didn't feel the need to. All right, so what did you all do? You all answered a series of very simple day-to-day questions on how you prefer to do things. There is no right or wrong answer. We all have preferences, okay? I have taken to using this questionnaire on the first day of orientation. One of the first things my students do, I make them take a questionnaire. I make sure to tell them it's a questionnaire, not a test, because you want to know how carefully they try to read those questions when they're a first-year law student. But there is no right or wrong answer. And why do I do this? Well, I'll tell you that in a minute. Let me start by telling you that this is available online. Copyright is granted freely and for free for educational purposes, which is why I have chosen this test. This is not a personality test. This is not Myers-Briggs. This is not even an incredibly in-depth cold learning analysis, okay? But you have to pay for those. They might give me better information. They might give me more information, but I don't have the budget. And I want something that I can do quick, dirty, doesn't need a lot of interpretation, and I'm not looking for incredible accuracy or precision. I'm looking for rough cuts. I take the test myself regularly. I'm going to tell you why I do that too. Your learning preferences don't change drastically, but they can shift. Okay, why do I do all this? Why am I telling you all about this? Why do I think this is worth your time and energy? Not that it's a particular lot of time and energy, and it's kind of fun. What you'll notice comes after the questionnaire is a series of help sheets. I don't know if anyone turned past that page, but you have a series of additional pages which provide what's known as help sheets for the various preferences. Now, the last page talks about being multimodal, and if you are multimodal, you should read the help sheets for each of the modes of which you share modality. You can take this with you. It's available online. I want to talk about some of the uses and why I think this is a valuable tool. I'm also interested in hearing from you all other ideas on how to continue using it. As I said, I use this in orientation. I'm actually keeping statistics. My students, and one of the reasons I do it on paper is I have them turn it in. Because we are just going to start our third year now, I am going to start trying to see if there's some correlation. Okay? I don't really think there will be, but we're going to see. Assuming my registrar really has kept it in a usable form, which remains to be seen. So, why do I do this as the first thing they do in orientation? I don't know about your law students, but my law students come in eager to hear every and any tip they can on how to succeed in law school. And so they talk to every second year and every family member who's ever been a lawyer, not to mention every friend of the family who's a lawyer, comes in and, oh, you got to do this, or this is what worked for me. Flashcards, you got to do flashcards. Emmanuel's is it. Tapes. I lived with tapes. Cali, gotta love Cali. And you know, you get told that these are the beginning and end of the world, and these kids all run out, spend thousands of dollars buying everything and anything, and it may not suit their learning preference. And so what I do in orientation is I make everyone involved in orientation take this test, and when my student panels get up, or when my faculty talk, everybody starts by saying, I'm visual, or I'm read-write, or I'm kinesthetic, and this is what worked for me. So what I'm trying to do is help my students short-circuit the wrong turns. I'm trying to be more efficient and more effective by saying, at least take the tips and tricks from people who share your learning preferences. Now, unfortunately, they don't always believe me, and I can't make them listen. But those that do tend to skip some of the false starts that many law students make. How many people have had students go, well, I bought the Emmanuel's, I just never opened it, because it doesn't do it for me. So again, that is my number one starting place, and that's how I came to VARK initially. When I took over academic success, I started using it more. I would make students retake the test if they couldn't remember when they came to me having had academic difficulty after the first semester. And then we could sit down and say, okay, now knowing what I know about your learning preferences, tell me how you're studying. Tell me what it is you're doing to take in information and put out information. Because remember that learning preferences is only about how we like to receive information and how we like to spit it back out. It's nothing to do with anything else. It's how we deal with information. And so I can then start with them and I can say, okay, this person's testing out as kinesthetic or visual. and they've never touched a cali lesson. Well, if you're kinesthetic, sitting there and typing on the computer and working with that screen is as kinesthetic as you're going to get until you get to simulation and clinic, and that's what they want to be doing. But they don't realize that, and I can hopefully re-guide their study skills, because I'm a big believer that academic success is about working in study skills. Okay. How else do I use it? Because those are all really well and good, but there've got to be some other things, right? Well, I realize that I use it in my teaching. Now, let's stop for a second and do a cut back. How many people in this room tested out as read-write? Primarily, or one of their multimodals read-write. How many is oral? Not as many. How many is kinesthetic? And how many is visual? Did you see what happened? Most professors, most academics are more likely to be read-write, though I think most techies and computer people are likely to be visual or kinesthetic. I don't know if that came true in here, but traditionally whenever you do this in a series with law professors and stuff, you come up primarily read-write. And that's what we did. I am not read-write, which is probably why I have a secondary in read-write, but I'm primarily visual. And I know that because, well, I'll tell the truth now here, is that when I was preparing to do this presentation, I'd done a short version of it last year at the ILST conference, the Law School Teaching Institute. And I figured, oh, I'll just pull out my notes from that and work off that. And so I got to Baltimore and I went to pull out my notes to work off that, and I realized they're not online because I did them while I was in Uruguay on a placemat. And when you looked at my placemat, which I used as an example when I went to do this presentation, it was visual, it was clumped, it had lists, it was all organized by a truly visual person. But of course, I don't know where my placemat is, and I should have scanned it in so that I could print it again. So I'm working a little bit from memory, so if it's a little disjointed, I apologize. But the idea is clear. So why do I do VARK every semester? Because it reminds me that I have a teaching preference, and I tend to teach towards my own preferences. It's subconscious. But read-write professors tend to teach read-write. And many more of our students growing up in an age of using computers and looking at screens all their life are tending to grow up a little bit more kinesthetic and visual than we did. And so I do it to try and refresh my recollection that maybe I need to be working on and putting in more modalities into the classroom. And I think that ties in very well to all the things we're hearing about in McCrae and in Carnegie and in best practices, in that we're trying to make this experiential learning more accessible to people and teach them the skills and the tools. And I spent a lot of time thinking, what are we doing in law school? We're teaching them to be critical thinkers, right? We're teaching them to have the skills of lawyering, the thinking, the reading, the writing, the communications. That's what we're teaching them. And I have firmly brought into the concept of metacognition, the thinking about thinking, the learning about learning. And if I can get my students at the outset to start thinking about how they learn, I started them on a path of critical thinking in a non-legal context that they can understand, that then maybe I can transpose over to law. So I'm getting to the same points in multiple ways, and so I think it's very valuable. But what it also does is it reminds me that in terms of the oral, I'm at a 0. I cannot learn from just listening to save my life. When I'm having important conversations with friends and families, I pick up a pen and I write it down or I won't remember. Okay? So what do? For the last 3 years, I have podcasted every single lecture I teach. I think it is a waste of time. Personally, I don't like it at all. I went to listen to a whole bunch of summaries I did 3 years ago to see if I could reuse them. I couldn't listen to myself. I had to actually it was very bizarre, out-of-body experience. I'm listening to my voice, taking notes to figure out what I actually said to see if I could reuse it. But I have about 15 to 20% of my class that swears by it. That on their commutes, and one day walking my dog, I ran into one of my students who was running with me. Very uncomfortable feeling. But it doesn't work for me, and refreshing my recollection and thinking about the different ways that other people learn gets me podcasting every semester, even though I think it's a waste of time because there are a group of people for whom that makes learning better. Now, most of us And this works for people who are doing training and all kinds of other teaching. So it's not just in the classroom of a professor. It would work for training your faculties if you're the tech person. It really carries over. So most of us are very good about using our Blackboard, which they gave me in the courtroom, so I don't have, and I couldn't put lists up for you. I'm pretty good about doing lists and flowcharts because that's what I am. I'm one of these people who I just make the whole class. I've got contracts down to a beautiful flowchart. I can tell you the outline for contracts in 12 minutes, and then I can go through each one and have a mini flowchart. And there are a whole group of my students that love that. And then there are the others that get to that, and they're like, oh my God, that chart makes no sense to me. Some law students love study groups. You have those students that love the study groups? They're the oral people. They just like to talk, 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 talk. Okay? And here. But if an oral person is working with a read-write person, the oral person's talking and the read-write person's reading, we got a good fit. Right? Or if we have two talkers who are listening, that's great. But if your study group has a visual and a kinesthetic person, they're not going to get out of that study group the same thing. And it's why some very smart people can all work in the same study group, and one on the exam will get a really good grade, and the other two will do eh. And so the concept of this is to help our students become better metacognitive learners, focus on thinking about thinking, so that maybe they can figure out how to learn better, how to use their time efficiently and effectively. I don't know about you. When I took on academic success, I actually started going to property class because it was way out of my domain. I started doing the property reading again and going to class and taking notes. God, that takes a long time to read if it's not your area. You forget. And taking notes, my God, I know what's important in contracts. I've been teaching it. I know CivPro. I've been teaching. Property, it was out of my domain. And so, actually, if you haven't done it and you want to refresh your recollection of what they're going through, I really, really recommend reading one day's assignment and going to class with one of your colleagues. If you have to do your evaluations, if you're doing peer review, it's a great way to do really a better peer review because you'll actually know what they're talking about and how well he talks about the cases or she talks about the cases. So it can be a very useful thing. But again, in thinking about thinking and thinking about learning and thinking about what we're trying to train our students to do as lawyers, I realize that there's a lot of overlap. And this is one very easy and inexpensive way that you can begin the process from day one. My view is that if on day one I tell them it's important to be thinking about how you're learning, how many law students you know, they say, well, I did the reading. Yes, they read the 32 pages, but at any point along the way, did they stop to say, did a word of that register? Yes, their eyes ran over every word on all 32 pages, but we all instinctively know that occasionally we've read the same page twice and nothing's registered. We stop. We do something to fix that. Do we bother to explain that to our students? So, part of this is becoming a more aware learner so that you can train them, so that you can pick other learning styles. Now, I did want to talk a little bit about the learning styles. The Socratic method is a really interesting, or the modified Socratic. I don't know anyone who does truly Socratic. But the modified Socratic is a lot of oral interaction, right? True Socratic is all oral interaction. There's not even any nice board outline that you add. And over the years, I know a ton of people who have gone on to adding an outline on the board or PowerPoint or other things. But as you look at the help sheets, and if you haven't, I ask you all to take a second now and start flipping through not only your help sheets, but the ones for the other subjects. You'll begin to see that even in the way they're laid out, for example, the first one is the visual. And notice it's done in a chart form. Okay? And when you thought about it, when you look at those websites, I personally go for the ones with the pretty picture diagrams. This makes me very happy. Most of you are like, I like the clickies, or different people like different things, okay? Nothing wrong with it. If you went to the oral, you looked at it, and if you read the bottom, you prefer to have this page explained to you. The written words are not as valuable as that which you hear. You will probably go and tell somebody about it. And then when you move on to the read-write, and this again, I come in strongly, read-write, lists, textbooks, teachers who use words well, headings, definitions, dictionaries. Yeah, I got to admit, I have about 7. But what I like about this also is that not only does it talk to you about how to take it in, but it talks to you about how then to put it out on an exam. Because how many of you sit down and talk to your students and your students say, oh, well, I knew all the material, really I did, and you have a conversation with them and they really do seem to know all the materials, but they couldn't put it down on the paper. Anyway, so I wanted to sort of start with that and explain to you the various ways. One of the reasons why I think this ties into Cali so well is that for your students who are both visual and kinesthetic, Cali lessons are phenomenal. Okay? In my contracts classes, anyone who tests out kinesthetic, I send to Cali. I say there's a lesson for every topic, and I know the people who wrote them, they're wonderful. Go and do the lessons. Anyway, I'm curious, was anyone here familiar with VARK before they came? Have you been using it in other different ways?
I used it when I was teaching at a learning skills class.
I'm sorry?
When I was teaching at a community college, I used it.
Okay, and did you use it in similar ways?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Anyone else having used it?
Similar, just to help people figure out what they prefer.
And are you all finding resistance to it or acceptance to it?
Resistance from faculty.
Really? But your students are receptive?
I mean, the students, I think, understand it, but the faculty teach the way they teach, and they're not going to change.
Well, I agree with you. Some faculty won't change. For some reason, I don't have a problem changing the way I teach. But you ask me to change in other areas, I'm very resistant. I'm one of those people that no can come out of my mouth before yes, just because that means I have to change. I'm very stuck in my rut. I order the same thing at the Asian restaurant every day. That they walk in, they say, Deb, the usual. So, I get it. So faculty is resistant. And one of the reasons I like to do this to faculty is, one, because they find it amusing. They actually sit down. Once they start answering it, they get kind of into it and find it amusing. And then when you start asking them to look at their preferences and how they teach, they suddenly can see on a piece of paper how pedantic, almost blinded they are in the way they teach. We tend to teach to our own preferences subconsciously. It's not a conscious evil. We're not malicious or malevolent here. It is a subconscious thing that if it worked for me, that's how I should do it. And so some of it, again, is metacognition. It's getting people to think about thinking, think about teaching, think about learning. And if you can get them to step outside in a totally, not asking them to change, sometimes you can do it. My problem has been that I find that students take it in one ear and let it go out the other. Is that they're not resistant to doing the test. It's just that they don't want to believe that that preference tells them anything. And when someone else says, but flashcards were it for me, they go and buy the flashcards anyway. And that I find interesting, and I'm really looking for people who have encountered that and can offer suggestions on how we counteract it. Who else had used VARK or something similar? Yes?
Well, I use it to remind myself what I need to do that I'm not comfortable with. And the other thing, I don't tell them that I'm using VARK, but I talk about it at the beginning of class. And I tell them what my preferences are and what that means for me, and that they should think about what their preferences are. And how they learn.
I truly think that's key, because again, as I said, I think that if you can start law students thinking about thinking, that is one of the key factors of critical thinking, is the fact that you are looking at it and thinking about it and trying to assess it from multiple perspectives. And that's what so many law students are resistant to, right? But what's the answer? Right? How many people have had an entire class, and at the end of class they say, but what's the answer? And so, again, I start by saying there is no answer. And if you can see that I have a preference of one way and I tend to go towards my preference, but if I can stop, pull myself out of it, as I said, I've podcasted, Deb Quintel called me a podcast fool. And I personally, in a good way. But I personally, as I was saying, find podcasts useless. I mean, I tried. I took Professor Burnham's contracts podcast and went running with them for a while to try. I could not maintain a word of it because I didn't have a pen in my hand. Okay? So, again, I think it's incredibly useful for getting faculty to think about what they're totally ignoring. And if you show them the data and tell them that 15% of their students are oral and that, you know, or are kinesthetic, and you're not giving them anything that lets them be tactile or touching, you know, using other senses. Yes?
I've never used VARK before, but I do talk about learning styles. And one thing I realized when I first did it, at the beginning of the year, it didn't seem to have much impact. And so then I started going back to it after the first evaluation because all our students have succeeded just doing what they're doing. And when you talk about, you know, the need to adjust for learning styles, in my opinion, they all thought I was talking to somebody else because what they had done had worked just fine. I mean, they got into law school, right? So then it's only after I found that first set of evaluations that they're really ready to take. Maybe they do have to take some attention.
I totally agree. As I said, in academic success, I bring them back to it. Anyone else have experiences with it? Anyone else have thoughts or ideas as other ways to use it? Yes?
Well, I have this question, which is that, you may all be wired with certain preferences, right? But is it necessarily advantageous to always play to those preferences instead of helping people develop perhaps strengths and areas they have weaknesses because it may apply to their profession? In other words, depending on how they might or might not function in the legal profession as a lawyer, being kinesthetic may not be the best attribute to solely focus on. I don't know how malleable that is as an adult.
I've had this debate with a lot of people, and here's what I think is the difference. I think the skills you need to be a good lawyer and to even be a teacher. I need to be an oral person to be a teacher, right? 90% of what I do in the classroom is speaking and listening. I do about 10% of drawing on the board. So, but I am not an oral person. I am read-write. I am visual. My third is kinesthetic on oral. If I'm lucky, I get 1. Every time I do. Sometimes I get 0. But that doesn't stop me from being a more than competent lawyer, and according to my evaluations at least, a more than competent professor. You all can disagree with that if you'd like. I'm sure Kelly will have reviews, and yes, she definitely is not oral. But the point is that I'm not talking about the skills they need to function in the community. I'm talking about how they process information in their brain, both in and out. And I don't think that we have to force them to try and do that other ways. We have to force them to develop the skills they need for other things, but in terms of, we all have to read cases in law school, first-year law school, okay? We all have to figure out what to do with that information. Whether you read it 3 times and write about it in bullet points, or whether you put it into a tape recorder and listen to it, or whether you make it into a flow chart so that you can put it into your memory, so that you can later put it into context, remember it, and put it out, I think is a different issue than the skills you're talking about. And as I said, people can totally disagree on that, but I truly believe that when I go to prepare a lecture, I sit and I make flow charts and graphs and stuff. And my notes, when I first started teaching, someone said I would eventually get to this point. I bring in a 5x7 index card with my flow chart. And that's what I need to teach.
So let me simplify the question, which is that are any of these malleable? In other words, as a general rule, as adults, are we kind of hardwired and this is who we are? Are these things trainable, adjustable?
I do it every semester because mine changes slightly, not incredibly. If I've been doing a ton of cali work, I tend to be more kinesthetic. If my life has been in a stage where I've been doing a ton of research and writing, I tend to be more read-write because that's what I've been doing. So yes, I think that there is some malleability.
So I would follow that up and say that then if in the classroom what you are approaching with the students with is going to have an impact on how they would take tests later in the same way that whatever you're doing is impacting you, do you need to, is there value in making choices and saying they'll be better off potentially in this profession or that, or it doesn't have to be law, to present in this way so that they're exposed to it so that they shift?
I think to some extent that is what we do. I mean, I think in the law we do moot courts and everything else to do just that. But what I'm saying is that what this does, it says to a student, I have to function in a world which is mostly oral, but I'm not a really good oral person. I don't process information well. As I said, I don't go anywhere without a pen. Okay? I seriously will start writing. And I am one of these kinesthetic listeners. I mean, I cannot listen if I'm not writing. I can be doodling. But if you just make me sit on my hands and sit still, I am so fidgety, I cannot focus. Okay? I have learned that if I want to remember the information, the way for me to take what you're saying, put it into my brain to process it, is to write it down. That's what I do. Some people sit in law school and don't write it at all. They'll remember it better. If they write it down, they're spending too much time focusing on forming the letters, they won't remember a thing. So what I'm talking about is not necessarily the skills to go out there as much as how you take in information and process it. If you're in a client interview, there are certain things you want to do in a client interview. We teach, to be good, organized about asking questions, to have good active listening skills, all sorts of things. But does that mean when I am hearing you, if I need to draw it in a flow chart, or if I need to take straight bulletproof notes, or if I can just listen, or if I need to record it, does that really matter the method of which I input the information? I don't know. I mean, it may or may not.
Yeah, well, I think for me, it's that I don't think that the question can necessarily be limited to that front end of that. Because there are different ways that you can be impacted with the way that you approach these things. And it sounds like that depending on what you're exposed to, it can shift or have an impact on you over time. Then there's also the cause and effect. So, if a student is simply approaching and saying, well, I'll work better today because I'm an oral person, well, if they get exposed to rewrite all the time, maybe later they're going to be better responding to rewrite. Do they want to be better responding?
I think that the studies show, and I haven't done all of this research, I think that the studies show that the older we get, the more multimodal we get. We don't tend to lose our strong preferences, but we tend to develop better secondary preferences. And that may be what you're getting at. But I'm never going to develop an oral preference. Just not going to happen. And I mean, some of you are the same. Some of you had one where there was just 0. Or 1 that you were really, and the other 3 might have clumped. Some of you were just incredibly evenly dispersed. You're much more balanced people than I. I couldn't have planted that question better, could I? You have just segued into what I just started researching on, which is listening. And that's what I'm hoping to do next year at Cali. I've been really working hard, being foisted into academic success and academic support without ever having been trained for it. Again, the thing that truly amazes me is that law professors have no training for this job specific to teaching, and that we pick it up haphazardly along the way if we care to or not. And so I'm actually going to, we're hopefully going to a workshop this summer in New York on helping adults learn, because most of our students would qualify as adults in postgraduate education. And in going through the stacks of the library, which I hadn't done in ages, it's so much fun, a liberal arts, social sciences section of the library, I came across a book called Listening, and it was talking about teaching people foreign languages. And then I stopped and I thought about how many times I have heard or read that the first few weeks of law school are listening to a foreign language. And so I realized that there has to be some connection, and there's a whole series of issues on what exactly listening is. And I'm seeing that listening does tie into learning preferences. So, it's where your strong suits and stuff are. But there are a ton of barriers to listening, and that's where I'm going to be focusing. And the radio is a barrier to listening because it's distracting you. It's pulling your attention elsewhere. You can't focus on what you're trying to process because you're hearing these signals. And anyway, that'll be next year. Stay tuned. Other questions, comments, thoughts? As I said, VARK is available online. Neil Fleming, his email address is there. If you send him, you don't even need to get copyright, but they request that you do. And if you send him an email, he will say back, please feel free for any non-profit kind of thing. So any for schools and teaching, all of it's free. If you want to use it in something that you get paid for, he does charge a fee for it. He also has provisions there that if you want to pay, they have, you can buy software that keeps track of it all and does some of the stats for you. Or they'll actually keep it in their central database for you. I think that that's part of what happens when they like people to do it online, because then they get the statistics for theirs. Anyway, I will let you all go out to your next break early. Thank you for joining me. I hope it was of interest, and if you have any questions, let me know.